In July 2025, the Pentagon agreed to pay a private company nearly double the market price for a chemical almost nobody's heard of, a guaranteed price floor backed by the Department of Defense per MP Materials' own public filings. Here's the number driving that decision. China refines roughly 90% of the world's rare earth elements, according to the International Energy Agency's 2024 data. Not mines, refines. That distinction is the entire spine of this video. The company at the center of it is MP Materials, and the mine is called Mountain Pass out in the California desert. Its history explains almost everything that follows, so let's start there instead of the policy. Mountain Pass first opened in 1952. For decades, it was one of the largest rare earth sources on Earth. Then, in 2015, the company that owned it, Molycorp, went bankrupt, not because the mine ran dry. China flooded the global market with cheap rare earth material, pushed prices below what Molycorp could survive on, and simply outlasted the competition. Call that the 2015 playbook. We'll come back to that exact phrase a few times because almost everything the U.S. government has done since traces back to not wanting to repeat it. Did China break that market on purpose, or was it just better at scaling production? Comment yes or no below. It's genuinely a debated question, and I want to see where this audience lands before I tell you where the evidence points. Mountain Pass reopened in 2017 under new ownership, restructured as MP Materials, led by CEO James Litinsky. Today, it's the only operation in the U.S. that handles the full chain in one place: mining, separation, and refining. We'll follow Litinsky's decisions through the rest of this video, because his company is the one actually placing the bet the U.S. government is now backing. Let's go in order. First, how refining became the real bottleneck. Second, how MP re-entered the market and what the government offered them. Third, why that deal is controversial. Fourth, what it would actually mean to own a piece of this business. Start with the bottleneck. Rare earths aren't actually rare in the ground. There are 17 of them, and China holds only about 35 to 38% of global reserves. Not mines, refines. That distinction is the entire spine of this video. It's expensive, technically difficult, and generates toxic, mildly radioactive waste. Building refining capacity isn't just capital intensive. It requires environmental permitting that can take years, plus ongoing waste handling costs most Western regulators have historically been unwilling to approve at scale. That compliance burden, as much as the chemistry itself, is why China built a 40-year head start almost nobody else wanted to compete for. Two groups of these elements matter most. NdPr, neodymium and praseodymium, are the workhorses behind permanent magnets in EV motors, wind turbines, and electronics. Heavy rare earths, mainly dysprosium and terbium, get added in small amounts to keep those magnets from losing strength under extreme heat, which is why they show up disproportionately in military hardware. Now the deal itself. In July 2025, the DoD signed a 10-year price floor of $110 per kilogram for MP's NdPr, against a market price sitting around $60 per kilogram at the time. If the market stays below that floor, the Pentagon pays MP the difference on every kilogram produced. Here's the macro math worth sitting with. At roughly 6,000 metric tons of annual NdPr production, a $50 per kilogram gap works out to over $300 million a year of potential taxpayer-backed payments, an internal estimate reported at the time of the deal. Since 2025, China has run 2 waves of export controls on 7 medium and heavy rare earths, tightened again in January 2026, with licenses that can face indefinite review. The price impact has been sharp. NdPr oxide in China averaged roughly $100,000 a ton in the first half of 2026, up more than 73% year over year, per CITIC Securities. European import licenses are getting approved below 25% of the time. It isn't limited to rare earths either. Gallium, another China-dominated material, hit around $2,100 a kilogram in March 2026, up 123% in about a year.
That pressure pushed 54 countries into a first-ever critical minerals ministerial in Washington in February 2026, forming an alliance called FORGE, specifically around this vulnerability. Everyone at that table is chasing what MP already has a head start on. Smart policy or a corporate sweetheart deal? Vote in the comments, because the next part is exactly that argument, made by people who study this for a living. Here's the honest counter-argument. The Payne Institute has pointed out that a price floor granted to one company functions as a barrier to entry for the next one. A new competitor has to survive on open market pricing, while MP doesn't, which could mean the U.S. ends up with one protected national champion instead of a genuinely competitive domestic industry. That's a real cost, not a hypothetical one. Less competition usually means slower innovation and less pricing discipline over time, even inside a strategically important sector. The counter to that counter, from the government side, without a floor, MP faces exactly what killed Molycorp, the 2015 playbook, and there'd be no domestic refiner left to compete for. It's a trade-off between one protected champion and zero domestic capacity. Reasonable people land in different places on which risk is worse. So, is owning a piece of this industry a defensible business or a taxpayer-backed safety net dressed up as one? Here's the investor-facing version of that answer in 3 scenarios. Scenario 1. China holds its current export controls steady. NdPr stays above $110, MP earns market price plus its DoD upside share, and the floor barely gets used. This is the best case for MP as a standalone business. Scenario 2. China eases controls again, the way it briefly did in mid-2025 before tightening back up. Prices fall toward or below $60, and the floor kicks in. MP still gets paid $110, but increasingly out of taxpayer funds rather than the open market. Good for MP's shareholders, more expensive for the government backing it. Scenario 3. Beijing tightens further still, in direct retaliation for deals like this one. Prices spike even higher. MP's upside grows, but so does the risk of secondary trade friction, tariff retaliation, diplomatic pressure on allies buying from MP instead of China, disruptions that could seriously slow timelines for some defense and EV programs in the meantime, even if they don't stop outright. That third scenario is the one worth watching most closely, because it's the one where MP's value and broader economic risk rise together, not separately. Which brings us back to Mountain Pass itself, where this story actually stands today. MP still can't refine everything the mine produces. The company has said publicly it's stockpiling unprocessed concentrate while its new separation lines slowly come online, getting paid by the DoD to sit on that inventory in the meantime. Litinsky's own framing of the opportunity is telling. Even China's roughly 90% share of global NdPr production, he's noted, comes down to output from just 2 hard rock mines and refineries, meaning the entire global chokepoint on this material traces back to a remarkably small number of physical sites. Mountain Pass is trying to become one more. Whether that bet pays off doesn't rest with Litinsky or with the Pentagon. It rests with a handful of licensing decisions made in Beijing, which the U.S. has essentially no direct control over, which is exactly why Washington decided the insurance was worth the price. So, tell me, does a government-guaranteed price floor like this sound like smart strategic planning or an expensive subsidy the market should have solved on its own? Drop your take in the comments. I read every one, and I'm genuinely curious which side of this trade-off this audience lands on.